I think that I fixed it. I have not. Bad.
Oh, it seems that we have the look.
Yeah, I hear sounds.
All right. Okay.
I was a genius for telling us to reset it.
All right. Are we back? Are we back, everyone?
Yeah, we're
Are
back.
we back.
I can hear my.
We're back.
Yeah, I can
All
hear my
right.
voice.
Wonderful.
We're back. We're so
we did it,
fucking back.
America. We did it, America.
Not the can hear
We're back.
others. Yeah, we did it.
We did it.
We won.
TNO is. We saved it. TNO was dead earlier for like.
All the
15
doubters.
minutes, and then we saved TNO. So.
All the doubters, all the haters in the chat. We did it.
Exactly.
The lion has risen.
The lion has
We
risen.
know the true believers in the chat stayed and they were rewarded.
Yeah, the lech has rust. We've saved TNO. There we go. Alright. Hello, everybody. This is the actual start of this stream. I'm so sorry about the 20 minutes of my mics being broken. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be streaming Ukraine. With me, I have Maedhros, Britain lead. I've got Lilian, the community lead. I've got Korn, the Ukraine lead. Frost, the Britain co-lead. There's two of them. And then finally myself, design lead, and Ukraine TL. Oh, is the music too loud? You're just going to have to... I can turn it down on my end. Why not? All right, there we go. Quieter music. Hello, everybody. And welcome.
Glad to have everyone here, by the way. Just thought I'd let you all guys know.
Yes.
Thank you for your patience. Shout out to Smig1919 and Gay Disaster 69 for saying hi to me in the chat.
Yes. So,
those guys are cool. They're officially Frost cool.
One last little bit of testing. Can everyone see this beautiful focus or this beautiful loading screen and new icon for the patch? All right, people can. All right, looks like we're in.
I hope you all see the come and see reference in one of the menu pictures.
Yeah, you can see we're clever on TNO. On TNO, we do clever things. We also have, courtesy of Daffy, this new icon. It's gone through many its change. We've had basically 3 of them for this patch, but this new one, I think, is quite nice. Here you can see we've got our new start menu. It's pretty neat. We've got, this is for the UK. We won't be playing the UK, but the UK will be happening alongside this Ukraine stream, so you'll be seeing it as we go. And we, of course, will not be playing as that. We'll be playing as Ukraine here. Here it is on the map. You might notice some of the changes we've shown off in various leaks in the past few weeks. There's Transnistria's government. There's the Kingdom of Hungary. And over here you might notice a slightly different Kazakhstan, but I won't focus on that. Alright. Since it's been so long, I shouldn't continue with the delays. Let's just begin here. Alright, so I can't, just for both the chat and for my fellow people here, I'm running a little low tech here. I don't have the chat like overlay visible to me as I play, so if any of my fellow team leads here have a question they want to ask me or see a question that's interesting in chat, please just shout it out, and
yes.
I will. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
We had a question from one person a little while ago before all the technical difficulties, asking if we were going to show the UK focus trees.
I don't believe we will. I mean, we can briefly glance over here. Ooh, look, there's Ireland.
We can look at. Yeah.
Very different UK.
Very different to the one that we've seen in patches before, and it's a culmination of almost a year and a half of my work, blood, toil, tears, and sweat. And I'm just so happy to see it, showed off to all of you guys. We've done a lot of focus tree changes, which is why there are a couple of issues of like GFX. Some don't have their icons fully in just yet, but hopefully, if everything goes well, you won't actually have to see any of those parts where that's currently an issue.
Yes. Yes, excuse the occasional missing piece of GFX. We are, after all, probably a little bit out from the release, but I do promise we're quite close, and here we will be able to see a little bit of Ukraine in action. So starting off, we've got this. This is the breadbasket mechanic. I'm gonna try to be mostly casual as I play. I should also set up my army, do all the boring stuff, get it out of the way. Guys, I'm really good at Hearts of Iron. I have this awesome strategy called taking all of the groups and just putting them in. This one's too big. We're gonna have to move some guys over. Alright. Area defense. Why not?
Someone asked in the chat, is HMMLR being removed? No, you'll still be able to play base England's HMMLR. It's just that for the patch that we're doing currently, if you don't use the toggle to use the Old England anymore, you're not going to be able to play HMMLR because we have been focusing on collab content ever since we were a submod. Basically, you're going to be able to play up until the end of the Civil War and the first 100 days of the successors to the main collab governments, but we will be focusing on Himmler at a later date. If we make another patch like this with same content scope for Himmler, that could be possible, but it seems like the more likely option is that we just go a full 10 years of content for all the collaborators, and then we go on to Himmler. So, yeah.
Here's our nice first event here. I'm not going to read through all the events because I assume that's not how these sort of streams work, because it would take forever, but I'm very proud of them. A lot of the early events were written by me when I first joined TNO, so I just thought I'd shout myself out there. A little bit of, I don't know, pride in my work.
The writing is very good for the country, especially simply just because someone like Erich Koch is such an interesting figure. If you've read stuff about the history of Reichskommissariat Ukraine, it's a very evil person, but it's very interesting to study someone like that.
Absolutely. I mean, definitely one thing researching Ukraine has led me down is just all of the... I mean, you've already got, of course, all the strangeness that exists within just the Nazism itself, but when you combine that into their imagination of how colonialism might work, you end up with an extremely odd mix. And that is exemplified in a man like Erich Koch, who essentially was never supposed to be in the role that he was given, but was given it anyway because no one listened to Rosenberg and was just an awful, evil human. Here you can see all of our nice, fancy, assorted laws. I'm going to show this off because this change is one of them, so I thought I might as well. Yeah.
So why don't you share a little bit about what Ukraine is like at the start in 1962? What exactly are we looking at here?
All right. So in 1962, Ukraine is in an sort of a long-term decline. It's not necessarily as insane as like Moscowian, but it is absolutely on the downslope and it has been for a long time. Settlement is still a big part of the policy of the government, but in practice, it's certainly not to the extent that that someone like Erich Koch might have wanted it to be. But you can see the effect of it if you click around. So you can see that here, for example, this is, excuse the name, it really was called this. This is where Hegewald, the German colonized... Basically, the Germans attempted to colonize this area, and you can see that in TNO this has been somewhat successful with a large German minority in this city that was called Hegewald. And then here, of course...
Show them the... you should show them the cultural map of Ukraine as well, just to give them a bit
you're
of
right, I can show them the full map. I always forget about the culture button, but that's on me. And you can see here the way that, while the majority of it is still very much Ukrainian, you do have real areas of German control, especially here, and of course you have Crimea, which at one point this would have been part of the Reichskommissariat, but it's no longer because it has been annexed away. And then out here you can even see a small Russian minority. I guess not small, but present. Perhaps not quite as relevant in this world as they are in the real world, but they still very much matter. But one other thing I should mention is that in the world of TNO, despite Koch's pretty famous statements that if he ever saw a Ukrainian, if he ever saw, Ukrainian worthy of meeting with him, he'd have him shot. In this world, due to factors outside his control during the West Russian War, there is the Ukrainian National Council, which is their committee, which is this body of collaborators that was founded by Libron, who has now become head of government. That means that he is the deputy. He is deputy Reichskommissar, as well as head of the main department for administration. You've also got Brodagam, you've got Otto Ollendorf, and you've got Richard Wagner, each of which have their own opinions. Brodagam is the nephew of old ally of Libron and has been given the role by Libron's machinations and also Brodagam's connections, the uncle. And so he is pretty new to the role, but he's also very idealistic, much more so than, I guess all these people are idealistic in their own way, but he certainly believes that he can utterly reshape the Reichskommissariat. Similarly, Ollendorf is, if you know him from history, a truly horrible human being, a mass murderer and war criminal who participated in the Holocaust. But he also was an intellectual who had his own imagination of how Nazism should operate, which imagines sort of these economic theories that were much more free market than someone like Koch would have wanted, who was much more of a, I guess you'd say he allowed for a great deal of collective farms and things of that nature, which were created by the Soviets, but kept in a slightly changed way by him. You can see here, though, that actually right here you can finish off the communal farms. I'm not going to fully explain the distinction, but essentially these massive state farms are turned into communally ran farms. Oh, someone apparently asked me to click on Kazakhstan. Will do. Here you can see what's going on in Kazakhstan. I'm not going to go too into it because I'd love to. I designed Kazakhstan, so I have a lot of affinity for it. But simply put, while it is united, it is also very much divided in spirit between a Kazakh and a Russian minority. And it's not going to be pretty. I really should be doing more of this. This is the mechanic here. It's very...
Obviously, you don't have to manage your domestic production. You also have to account for the fact that the Reich demands a consistent and quite large amount of agricultural produce themselves.
So you can see here that of the grain we start with quite a lot, but a huge, huge amount. Essentially, all that we actually currently produce is demanded by Germany, and only in that remaining portion we currently don't have. So if we want to actually feed Ukrainians, of course, whether we actually want to feed Ukrainians is a different question, but if we want to, we are going to have to squeeze out as much resources as we can, exploit as much as possible in order to maintain our own food supply. A reality of existing under a colonialist state.
Also, simply put, if something went too wrong, the Ukrainians would be the first to suffer. And in some cases, some people would actively want that to occur.
Yes. I should note that General Plan Ost, though currently not in its... currently, there's no hunger plan currently being ran in 1962, but General Plan Ost is still on the books, and the scars of it still very much exist, and we might see that if I play the Ukrainian Civil War poorly. Hopefully I will play well enough that I will not have to.
Perhaps you should show. You should probably show some of the people in the chat the new ideology colors system that I made.
You're right. That's a good point.
With you can show the Brodagam group.
Yes.
And then I think Britain and Romania also have it. I think a couple others as well, but those are two that come off my.
Yes. So one thing that we've changed, and it's a pretty major change, is that in the past we've had lots of arguments about how to represent multiple ideologies that are multiple groups that have similar ideology but differ in what they ultimately want. And so in the past, we've used all kinds of methods. But currently, we've decided to add new slots for ideologies that are the same ideology, but they're different slots. So you can see here, these are both National Socialism, but this one is mainline National Socialism under Erich Koch, and this one is National Socialism under Hans-Otto Brodagam. Similarly, as Maedhros pointed out, in Romania, you've got two different liberalism factions. You've got two different.
Actually, there's three liberalism
there's
factions.
three?
There's a tiny
So
little one as well.
small.
Yeah, there's the
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
Yes.
that one will be merged into the rest of the party as well in a couple of months when the P&L unifies and starts becoming an active electoral force within Romania again. But it's not something that you'll be seeing within major news events. I might point it out here and there, and it's pretty neat. But until Romania gets something like full content, it's going to be something that is fairly niche.
Yeah.
There's also the divisions of the PNT as well into the center and the left, whereas the center is more just like an orthodox agrarianist, somewhat okay with the free market running in their country. The PNT left is a lot more social democratic in that outlook. Far more concerned for people's basic well-being. That's not to say that the center isn't. It's just that they adopt, definitely a more leftist interpretation of what they view as agrarianism for the country.
And this reminds me, actually, we should show off the current... What's the button for this? We should show off the current size of the Einheitspact. Because as you can see, after the changes to Romania and Hungary, it now starts with all of the UK. It starts with all the way down to Bulgaria. It's quite large, although it's actually lost one member, you'll notice. And that's because we haven't done... Maedhros can talk more about this. Would you like to talk about what's going on with Ireland?
Oh, if I could talk what's going on with Ireland. Ireland hasn't really received major changes with this. Like, none of the previously planned things were changed with Britain, and we compensated to adjust for the fact that we weren't going to go into this mod with the plans that we used to have for Ireland, which was a no-offend member. And we were perfectly fine to make these because a lot of the plans were like half-baked and not really like followed through on. So you're going to be seeing the same Ireland that you all know and love, but they've also added a couple of extra flavor for it, including, if I can reveal it, election outcomes, actually, for what happens post the normal contents ending. There's going to be a lot of strife that happens when Fianna Fáil sort of either stay together or fracture into numerous different personalities trying to maneuver their way to power. And you're going to see a lot of them through new news events, and you're going to see just some very intriguing new stuff that we're going to put forward to kind of like tease what's coming for Ireland, because we haven't forgotten about it. There's a lot more content to come, and it'll be coming alongside with Britain in any future patch. That's basically what we... And, sorry. Well, when we integrated the mod, the Ireland team already wanted to have it essentially be a pact observer rather than an outright pact member, and we were fine with letting that be the case.
Yeah. So, all in all, you're looking at a larger pact and a bit more of a well-defined one in this update. So, let's see. As we go through, you're also going to be seeing a couple of events. Again, not going to read through them, but I will note that if you pause to read them, if you screenshot or what have you, these introduced all the other characters. So even though we will be playing as the RK, you can see here this event is introducing Vasil Stus, who is important in the Republic of Ukraine, or the Ukrainian National Revolutionary Army, as it begins. I also should show off, since I think we haven't shown this off yet, the new portrait for Hog. I think it's quite nice. We just implemented this recently, but there you can see how disheveled living in Ukraine for all this time and trying to manage it has made him. You can also see the horrible poverty rate. If you actually click through some of the laws, you can see just how awful life currently is in Ukraine, including, of course, the fact that the academic base is all pretty awful except for army, and the fact that you've got laws on the books, as I mentioned earlier, that are about things like the fact that the army can basically do anything at once if it's killing so-called bandits or partisans, and the fact that even flying a Ukrainian flag is currently forbidden under the law.
Someone asked in the chat, will Ukraine have any interactions with Caucasian or Moscovian?
At the moment, it doesn't have many, though it probably in the future will have more. The main places that it has interactions with in this update are Gothenland and some of the other independent nations out here towards the Mediterranean. And that's simply because when it comes down to it, these ones are also collapsing and falling apart, and they hardly make for great allies in a moment of crisis like this one.
Someone also asked if we could use the TNO soundtrack rather than the default Hearts of Iron 4 soundtrack.
Oh, unfortunately, I literally can't. I don't. Sorry.
Sorry, we weren't able to hear that. I think a lot of us have the stream muted because we don't want to hear our own voices again and again. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, sorry about that. If we do a part 2, of course, we will use the real music and not the TNO music, or the other way around. We'll use the TNO music and not the Hearts of Iron music.
Can Ukraine join the OFN? No. That is a no.
Strong no, it cannot. For so many reasons. Mainly being that would start World War III. No one wants to do that. I think I can... Oh.
Frontier Play is asking what's going on with Hungary, or is there any change in Slovakia?
Hungary I can't really comment on because I'm not that familiar with the plans and law, although I can tell you that it has been changed. And they also asked, is there anything being changed with Slovakia? Currently no, but there are plans in the works to try and get something out. It's just the fact that there's a bit of a struggle to try and make that like actually interesting rather than just having it be a nation that sits there. And you know what? Sometimes there can be nations where sometimes it's fine to have a nation just sit there and not really impact like your attention span for way too long. But we'll see. Slovakia is still very much like in the works.
Yeah, I actually spent a good while trying to make a Slovakia design, but ultimately I gave up on it, unfortunately. But I know that there are currently people working on it, and I trust them. They are very talented, and they've made a lot of great work all over the game, especially in the Pact. I will also point out that there's not a new skeleton for Hungary in this upcoming update, but there is a new set of national spirits, and there's also going to be a new bio for Horthy.
Well, it's not confirmed 100% whether or not there's going to be a skeleton for Hungary. There might be. I can't promise anything though. It's just that a lot of the bulk of the attention for Balkan skeletons was primarily me, and I focused a lot on just trying to get Romania and Transnistria done.
Yeah.
Which you'll see within the stream if we manage to get far enough.
Yeah.
Basically everything up until the oil crisis is done for Romania.
It's pretty cool, and they got it done, credit to Maedhros, with great speed and dedication. It was very cool to see. I think it's a really cool skeleton, and it has a lot of depth, which is really great to have in a skeleton, you know? Without being too spammy or anything like that.
Will Nationalist Ukraine be able to take Kuban from Caucasian in any of the future updates, since Kuban was majority Ukrainian in the 20s?
The answer is probably TBA. I don't know if I want to announce what's going on there in this stream.
Can we show the players the GDP per capita map mode for Ukraine and Europe?
Yes, sounds good. Here we are, GDP per capita. You can see just how much worse it gets as we move this way. And I think in the new we're planning to change things so it's even more lopsided, if I recall. And you can even see here's national GDP per capita. You can see just how much worse it gets as you get further and further into the east compared to how it is here in Germany.
I don't think the Transnistria one's currently reflective of the actual content. I think that might just be an error on my part for having maybe not coded in the right economic statistics. But if it is not the if that is the current one, well, welcome to the new hell on earth. But if it isn't, we'll hopefully fix that and get that sorted as quick as possible.
Bad news, everyone. Koch just got bombed. He got blown up, and now it's Libron's turn.
Is there a Bandera path? No, he's very much dead.
Bandera has in fact been killed. Yes.
But the UPA still uses him in almost every waking second. By use, I mean not his. I don't mean like use his corpse. I mean like use his symbolism, his identity. He's like, you know, him as an icon of Ukrainian nationhood.
Yes. So here you can see we can look at the loyalty of each of these groups. Fundamentally, there are four groups that most define Ukraine and its power structures, the Reichskommissariat specifically. And they are the industrialists, the bureaucracy, the collaborators, and the police. And those groups are mostly self-explanatory. I'll elaborate a little bit on the police, and that's because it should be noted that in this era, if you're being completely accurate, even the Reichskommissariat has no control over a military, a true military. It has a police force, but it doesn't have necessarily a military force. And that is why you have this police wing, which is currently ran by Ohlendorf directly, which is why Ohlendorf has the most control of it, even though the rest are currently controlled by Libron.
Seems one of our own mods asked us if Andrei Melnik is alive, and I think I can answer yes, he is.
Yes.
Unless if
Melnik is alive, and in fact, he currently heads the UNC.
he's a very Dick Flatten individual after years of having to not just lead the moderates of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, but also the one that was almost the most enthusiastic with signing up with the Nazis, and now has to loathe under a virtually powerless National Congress of Ukrainians.
Yes, it is in most contexts completely powerless at this point. And as you can see, things are going to start getting worse, which is a good sign for us to start focusing on the resistance, which is our other side for this. You'll notice that certain areas are very much controlled by groups that are not the Reichskommissariat. Those are the Red Army or the Insurgent Army or National Revolutionary Army. And I guess I will try to focus on getting control of the east, which I think will be helpful later on. But as you can see, our limited resources are tied in every which direction.
Do you plan to translate them into other languages, for example, Spanish? That's more just the fact that we don't really have an active translator team for Spanish working with us. We have a Japanese, a Chinese, and I believe a couple of other, also including Russian translation teams that work with us. But
I believe we actually do have a Spanish team that's working with us now.
Oh,
do we?
wonderful.
That's awesome. Hopefully we'll be able to get out a Spanish localization patch for upcoming anything very soon. Apologies for me spreading misinformation once again.
Camp Cruise 72 asks, can we show the Ukrainian Navy?
I suppose we can. There isn't one, I don't think. Ukraine... Well, no, it does have a tiny navy. It's not even in, technically, Ukraine. It's currently in what is actually a part of Germany. As you can see, things are happening out in here, but I won't focus too much on that. Let's stick around in Ukraine. Where'd he go? Oh, and I will say, actually, just to tell the group, I have not... This is a pretty recent thing that we've merged Ukraine and Britain together, and so... one, there might be a couple hiccups, and I'm sorry about that, but also it means that whatever happens in Britain is going to be something of a surprise to me. I've never actually seen their tree in action, so it'll be cool to have those things pop up as we play.
Actually, I think it might be cool to just show them the tree for Britain.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if it's transitioned yet, but I I think it has, yes.
Yeah,
There
it
we
would
go.
have. Yeah.
Look at that. Some beautiful icons here. I like this one a lot. And yeah, you can see that the fact that we are getting attacked on every side is really breaking our economy here. And despite my best efforts, it seems the communists have won in this region. Oh, one other thing I should show off is the new city lock. One cool thing that we've added is that the city lock, currently, you'll notice, is all German names and German descriptions. But once the Civil War begins, they'll switch over. And so you'll see they will be in... Well, they won't be in Ukrainian, but they will be speaking... What's going off that one? They'll be speaking in Ukrainian, or they will be describing a Ukrainian nation. They will have Ukrainian names. So, a little bit of fun there.
They'll also update their descriptions as well, because I know in Colombia a couple of cities have their descriptions changed with who owns them.
I will say, I had an extreme bit of luck just now. Oh, actually, before we continue, let's pause here for a moment and check at where that... Let's pause here for a moment and check at... Let's check where that straw poll is at. I'd like to see what people ultimately have decided on. And it seems that by a large margin, the answer is Libron, which, of course, I'm always excited to play. So, yeah. Let's play Libron. I have to admit, I was doing that automatically, but that's just because it's the path I made, so it's the one that I always think about first. Let's see. We don't want them getting more over the police. You'll notice that it's not so much that you are controlling yourself so much as you're stopping your opponents from getting power, which means that you're actually stopping buffs from occurring. You actually would get more buffs if you allowed these things to go through. But I don't want them to go through because I would like to maintain control. So you're kind of balancing at every moment these two things. And I will also prevent factionalism for the moment. Keto died. It's messed up.
A pack watch.
Pack watch. And I'm going to get the Bolsheviks out of here. Also, poverty is going up.
And you'll also notice that demand for grain is vastly outstripping supply now.
Yes. Things are starting to get quite bad. They want 35. We only have 32. So we're not even going to be able to match the Germans, let alone the Ukrainian people, who will have to starve. But that's just how it works when the Germans inherently come first in this system. Oh man. The resistance here has really destroyed it. We have to take it back.
Just to confirm, we are going with Libron, right? He won the poll.
He won the poll,
community.
Yes.
I'm very sad you guys didn't all choose Ohlendorf. You guys have disappointed and let the entire team down.
So sad. No, it's not actually. See, the best path is Libron. You were right. Ohlendorf is a nerd. That's also true of literally every one of the leaders, but it's especially true of him.
Oh, you might want to explain to the community Rosenbergite tendency, because I know we leaked that, but we didn't really follow up with the most comprehensive explanation in the world.
That's
So,
true.
especially when we're going through Libron, we can sort of just outline, who's Alfred Rosenberg, what did he envision for the East, and how does that translate to content?
Yes. So, essentially, Rosenberg had a very different imagination. He was the person who created the system of RKs, and he imagined them as having very different purposes for many of them. For ones like Moscowian, he essentially had the same belief as Hitler and everyone else, that they were fundamentally that they fundamentally needed to exist in order to oppress Russian people in every way. But for others, like Ostland, Ukraine, and Caucasian, as well as some that he imagined but were never created, like his Turkestan, he imagined that they would be more the point of genesis for having sort of an allied underclass of the oppressed groups that the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire had oppressed. And he and Libron and Radagon's uncle and several others, all the people who followed this tendency, were mostly from the East themselves. They were Germans who were born in, for example, Libron was actually born around here, I believe. And if I recall correctly, I might get this wrong, I'm sorry, history nerds, I believe that Rosenberg himself was from Riga, right? I know he's from Latvia. But the point is that the fact that they grew up in the Soviet Union gave them a very different perspective on how its colonialism should work. They were never entirely clear on exactly what they wanted. I think if you read about their livelihoods, they pretty obviously waffled between this more explicit endorsement of non-Russian nationalism and more of a colonialism in a, I guess you could say, a African colonialism model, if that makes sense, like something more like British colonialism. But ultimately, it didn't really matter because their ideas were barely put into effect, and therefore it became more of ideas on paper. But there still are these people like Libron who want to bring those ideas back into the fold through the tactics you'll see him do now.
I just need to correct the thing. We mentioned that Rosenberg was from Latvia. That's actually not true. He was born in Tallinn, so he was from Estonia.
Oh, he was? Oh, my mistake.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. No. It's nothing. It's all right. Yeah.
I see.
Something completely unrelated, but also coming with the ruin would be a facelift for Japan content. Not
Yes.
Yes, I was meaning to
but
mention
this makes Japan a more fun experience to play. So we hope you'll enjoy it.
And I will say, I did, while the creator of the Japan facelift is not here, they did send me their sort of FAQ for a variety of questions. So if anyone in the chat has a question about that, I can answer it, at least to the best of my ability, because I have those notes on hand. So
someone asks if there is a monarchist partisan group in Ukraine. No.
Nope.
No.
In the real world, there wasn't, and the last meaningful monarchists existed as shameless collaborators that didn't even particularly matter within collaboration, and they are definitely all way too old to be alive and relevant by the 60s.
I assume they also want to try and ask if whether or not there's someone that can become a hegemon, and that's also a no.
Yeah.
Monarchism is well and truly dead in Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, it's true for much of Europe. They're not all, but certainly a great majority.
Prime Gaming Submarine Instantly asks, so is it basically that the Rosenbergites want to turn all the arcades except Muscovine into puppet states?
More or less. Some of them probably would not go that far, and they would create sort of puppet states in all but name. So, for example, his plans for Caucasian were that each of the individual nationalities would be given a semi-independent, autonomous government that would have a large degree of power over its individual region, but they still would all be contained within the Reichskommissariat. And again, there's a lot of... It's important to understand that there's a waffling. So like Libron here is committing to a full-on republic, as we've leaked in the past, a full-on fascist Ukrainian state to collaborate with. But that's not to say every Rosenbergite is always going to go that far with it. Some of them would probably stop a little sooner.
Someone asked a while ago, sorry we didn't get around to this earlier, but they asked, since Bukharin took the place of Stalin in TNO, does that mean there was no executed Renaissance in Ukraine? Yeah, there was none. And there also wasn't, I believe, at the very least, human-caused famine within Ukraine during the 30s.
Yes, I believe that is where the lore is at there. It's a little... We're very careful about it because we don't want to lean into actual denialism. It is purely a product of this universe that the Russians were, or that the Soviet state was more permissive and less prone to human-made famine than the real world.
Also the case, I believe, is that Skripnik was never driven to suicide in 38, meaning that a lot more tendencies within the Ukrainian communists are very much more alive. Well, as alive as they can be with the fact that they've lived under 20 years of Nazi occupation. But definitely you're going to see a lot of that be heavily prevalent in the Ukraine SSR path.
Yes.
One user asks, are the ROA/RONA units present in Ukraine as attachments to the Wehrmacht SS units?
Well, there are collaborated units that are attachments. They aren't the RONA and the ROA, though. Those are entirely in Moscowian or further out here, of course, in Samara. And for the most part, I believe in the real world there were actually attempts to unite the ROA and Ukrainian nationalist collaborators, but they all failed pretty badly, and for the same basic reason that Russian nationalists don't play nice with Ukrainian nationalists, as it happens.
Someone asked, does Speer empower the Rosenbergists? I don't think Speer has a particular preference, unless if I'm wrong about that one. But I know Bormann definitely isn't sympathetic to them at all.
I believe that is correct, yes. That there isn't really... Speer does not have a leaning towards the Rosenbergites. He's just not against them. Certainly he can see their perspective, but it's not necessarily his. He will work well with other groups as well, like Ohlendorf. But Bormann is definitely against them, and even most Führers are going to be pretty opposed on the principle that their whole goal is, of course, to subjugate the East, and that's kind of not what the Rosenbergites imagine. So there's a pretty fundamental conflict that most leaders of the Nazi Party are going to have with this group.
Someone also asked, is Goering pro-Rosenberg, at least in his upcoming facelift? I can thoroughly say that won't be the case, simply just because Goering and Rosenberg in real life personally hated each other, and did not want to see the other in each other's presence. So
I actually don't
that
know if
gives you
that's true.
about
I wouldn't commit to that. Sorry, I don't mean to disagree, but
yeah.
I
Obviously,
I've
Goering
heard...
content we can't really reveal much about, but what I can say is that we will be considering these things,
Yes.
at least in future.
Yes, I can absolutely say that, again, no Führer, including Goring, is going to be easily convinced by the argument that Nazi colonialism is not, or Nazi settler colonialism is not fundamentally the goal of the Nazi project.
So it looks like Johnny Lynn 12 asks who the Reichskommissars do support, who the Führer candidates do support for Reichskommissar.
I mean, the honest answer is I think literally every single one would say Ohlendorf. I'm fairly certain. It's not like we haven't formally worked that out, but just given what I know about their positions and policies, that would be... Oh my god, I turned away for a second and everything's gone on fire. Oh no.
Someone asked the question of what's up with the Ukrainian SS. I believe Uglidoll, you can answer that because you've done Libron stuff.
Yes. The Ukrainian SS, if you mean the SS branches that are within Ukraine, they are pretty fiercely controlled by Ohlendorf, and Ohlendorf has very wide support within them. In the past, there was more of a specific angle of them being like against the wider... Oh god, these guys are all starving to death. Sorry, I will continue speaking in just a moment. Go away. There we go. Anyway. In the past, there was more of an angle of them being specifically against the wider SS structure, but that is not true in the current Ohlendorf. They are just pro-Ohlendorf, pro his policies, though I believe some of them have their own ideas, but that's more of something that Ohlendorf will have to deal with after TNO, after this release, in his full content.
Does the Maedhros movement still exist as partisans and play any role in the new update? No. Not at all.
Nope. At one point, the closest we ever got to even considering the idea was just considering using former Maedhros who defected to the Red Army, but I don't even think we're using them at this point. Pretty universally, the Maedhros just do not matter. They have been killed and destroyed.
And even if we still include those X figures, you have to remember that a lot of these people aren't really die-hard anarchists. A lot of them essentially were just common petty thieves and thugs.
Yeah. Like the ones who defected to the Red Army were almost always the least committed, the least doctrinal, and the most self-interested, and generally tended to work as spies and turncoats. They were pretty awful, and even if they were used, and currently they're not used, though I imagine they may be like present, they would not be at all followers of anarchism in any way, or even the Maedhrovite like imagination of anarchism. If you do that something different.
Somebody asked how many years of content Ukraine will have.
Ukraine content ends in, I believe, 1965 around 1965.
However, there are plans to go far beyond that.
Yes. All governments that can take over in Ukraine, we hope will have content at least until Germany's return, which is like 1966, and several, those which can work with Germany will have content that extends all the way to 1972, including yours truly.
Would anti-USSR sentiment be as bad as our timeline without Stalin? If it is, what would that mean for the Banderites? Well, the big caveat to this is that we have to remember that the USSR currently, or at least to most of mainstream Europe, doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
However, what does it mean for the Banderites? Not really much, I don't think so. Because from what I understand, the progression of the OUN's nationalism came very much from first the Poles and then sort of evolved into select personalities coming to power with their own fringe and quite hardline ideas. And that sort of, rather than anything else done by the Soviets, that sort of more motivated them into the rhetoric that they then adopted, at least especially during the war and post-war. So I don't think it matters that much.
Nice. Honestly, we probably should be building some planes here.
the Ukrainian Red Army make a deal with Germany?
No.
That just about answers it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are other cases where I might play it more coy, but I feel it should be fairly obvious that there is no deal to be made.
We got some questions from our... Oops, sorry, please.
No, continue.
No, it's just that I wish to forward some questions from our Asian community, so if you don't mind, I'll just read them out.
Oh, sure. Feel free.
Oh, thank you. So the first question I have is from our Chinese community. So how bad is the suppression of the Orthodox faiths in RKU?
How bad is the suppression of the Orthodox faith?
Nice. Right, that is the original wording, so I'm just forwarding it here.
The answer is pretty bad. I mean, inherently, the way that the Germans, when they colonized and conquered Eastern Europe, their plans for orthodoxy were a little varied, but the largest extent of it would be that they only want any orthodoxy to be done through... Any orthodoxy would be through German channels, controlled by Germany, or it would be fiercely suppressed, is the basic answer. So, all in the same way you have like positive Christianity, but more strictly and really enforced, and not just like a big failure that kind of gets shuffled under the rug, as I understand it. Orthodoxy would be really suppressed in Ukraine.
Thank you. And another one we have here is, what is the German-Ukrainian population ratio in the RK in 1962?
What is the German-Ukrainian population ratio? It is... I don't know the exact number, but it is... the Germans are only a minority, but they are, I think, above 10% at the very least. And more if you count regions like so-called Taurian, who are, at this point, by vast majority German.
Could I just quickly answer a question from the chat?
Oh, please do.
Someone from a super event fan content creator, they asked how many shades of each like faction or like ideology color will be like present in the next update. The answer to that is you will have, for every single ideology, there will be obviously the one mainstream, and then there'll be one darker and one lighter version. There are exceptions though to that rule. So instead of having just three, I believe communism, fascism, and National Socialism have five in total. So 4 extra ones. That's just to represent that there's a lot more, obviously a lot more differences in how they operate compared to like your average mainstream ideologies.
Yeah, most of the time you're not going to need 5 liberal parties that all hate each other, but there are cases where that's going to be true in communist dictatorships to represent various factions, or, of course, as you see here, 3 different ones for Nazism.
Someone just asked, is Esoteric Nazism a subdivision? And I think this is the first time we publicly acknowledge it. Yes. So Esoteric Nazism has been removed as a mainline ideology, so no more purple. But every single one of its sub-ideologies has been merged into National Socialism. And that's been accompanied with along the most of the other ideology color changes in general. So a lot of the colors were made a lot darker and a lot more desaturated to essentially just to make it look nicer, because I think it did.
Yeah, and it also makes it much, you get that feeling of evil from National Socialism rather than it feeling a bit more like an in-between between Burgundian system and fascism. Yeah. It's much darker now, because it should be the most evil ideology, essentially.
Will there still be a Thatcher path for the UK? No. Thatcher is, at the very least, a minor resistance leader. So, because she was a chemist, she's quite adept at bomb-making skills for the resistance, which is a bit funny considering the procession of IRA memes. But trust me, that wasn't the main impetus for it. Thatcher might show up at some point later on, but she won't be at any point really like a major political figure in either collabs or resistance government. You will see people that were around her in real life, especially Keith Joseph, who you're going to see as one of the conservative candidates for Himmler in their first elections. But as for her, I don't think we'll be including her anytime soon.
All right, we have another question here. So, if a non-collaborationist regime won the Ukrainian Civil War, will they attack the Kriegsmarine holdout in Gotland?
We should actually be able to see that a little bit, and the answer is yes. If a government that is non-German takes over Ukraine, they will see the southern region as also being part of Ukraine, and they will take that over. I think there might be an exception to that rule, but I am not even sure if there's even one. I believe it's pretty much universal. Forgive me, I'm bad at Base Hearts of Iron. I'm going to just pick the one I hope is right. I don't think that should be wrong.
No worries at all. And here's another interesting Kriegsmarine question. So, someone in JP asked, what is the relationship between the Navy in Crimea and the civil administration?
In the new update, the answer is that the Navy is just a lot less relevant for the simple reason that the Navy is currently here and Crimea is currently here. And so the majority of the Navy is not going to go over here and then like take it over. They're still present, but I wouldn't say it is really the core concept of Crimea going forward. And you'll see what Crimea is about a little bit when it appears.
Someone asked if Himmler's name was going to be changed away from that to separate it from the Burgundy Grand Plan. No, we're not going to be changing the name of it simply just because we didn't really find much of an issue with it. We found it worked fine enough and didn't see to include it, not include it and replace it with a different name that people would have to get accustomed to, just simply because in the old lore at some point it was affiliated with some Burgundy master plan. Obviously, that the Burgundy connection was never actualized, and a lot more Burgundy stuff has been diminished in recent patches. So it's pretty firm to say that when we say Himmler, we do mean like its acronym, the Most Loyal Resistance. We don't mean anything beyond that in terms of like any Burgundian like connotations or like Himmler connotations.
Super Ultra Combo 2023 Seek Joe Cool asks, if you want to play an insurgent group in the Civil War, what should you be doing during the lead up to it as the RK? Do you try and self-sabotage?
So I actually made a very stupid mistake that luckily worked out. At the very start of the game, a little pop-up appears right here, this one, that will tell you what destiny favors, and you get to pick which side you want to be on. What I should have done is gone into this and picked the Reichskommissariat Ukraine, but I wasn't paying attention because I was focused on the stream. And luckily, if you don't pick anything, the dice gets rolled, and it rolled on the right thing. So a 25% chance it all worked out. But you click on that, and not only is there a new UCW tree for playing that nation, but there's also a pre-UCW tree. And when you play that, this whole system gets flipped. So instead of you being the person who is trying to hold Ukraine together, you become the one trying to tear it apart, and your actions are also entirely changed to account for that. So you're now tearing down German control, and you're also sabotaging the grain output, which you can see they've done pretty well, actually. So that's essentially the core concept of playthroughs that are not Libron.
It says he's done very well. His demand is like twice his supply.
Yeah. Awesome. So cool.
All right. Here's another question from our Asian communities. It concerns the Japan facelift, and we got a person asking, what will happen to the Daily coup after the facelift?
All
I think
right,
we'll have to consult the fact.
let me pause for a moment and see. Oh, here we go. It has been touched up, and some of the weird decisions have been removed. I sorted all the events, and they now follow a natural and chronological order with no repeating events or gap of logic. The trigger to lose the crisis has also been changed. So, the answer is it's been touched up.
Will Elizabeth and the rest of the royal family remain in Canada or still go to Britain if Jones's Republic occurs? I mean, at that point, the royal family is basically reduced to like a list of who's who of like formerly famous people. So I guess as like philanthropists and whatever, they can still like reside wherever they want to. In Britain, they'd be let back as like private citizens and not like heads of state. But in all honesty, it's whatever like each individual family member wants to do, or whatever like one family member wants their like immediate relatives to do. So they could be in Canada, they could be in America, they could be in Britain. It's not really that. We'll eventually get around to when we do Himmler content. We'll get around to probably events concerning what the royals are doing, without not being royals anymore. But as of now, it's still very much like early works. Will there be any new content for Northern Ireland? For example, can the Brits destabilize or even instigate insurgency / a proxy? Not too much we can reveal about that now, but the Paisley Revolt is not going to be something that the collabs in Britain will naturally support, because Paisley is actually more loyal to the exile government than he is to the collabs in London, and very much Ulster alone rather than Ulster as an extension of Britain to the immediate east. That is if the collabs still run the country. If the resistance runs the country, it is a much different story, though. But yeah. As for Northern Ireland itself, I know there's going to be a couple of changes coming eventually to how that plays out. So, for example, there's going to be no more stuff like the Good Friday Agreement being an ending, because that was quite rushed in terms of when it was originally implemented. That's not to knock on the Ireland team back then, but yeah, with time comes reflection, and the people that originally made that decided they wanted to do things differently.
Oh, we do have a British question. So, for our British leads, are there any colonies or any dominions that pledge their loyalty to the collaborationist government?
As of now, no. Britain is very much an empire without any colonies. There still exists a colonial secretary, believe it or not, but it really acts as more like a minister without any like cabinet portfolio. So essentially, it's someone that's there for like the ceremonial aspects, and it is very interesting because you can use that position as like a wedge to get into like the inner politics of the cabinet, despite being a relatively minor figure. But it's not something that you're going to be seeing like appear that too often in the early game. That is, though.
You'll notice that I have not done the best job of maintaining these two provinces, and so they've become red, and I actually physically cannot move my troops into them. And that is almost certainly going to be a big problem when the Civil War begins. You can also see desolation has grown extremely high, which means that the state level modifiers in this region are very bad. You'll notice that development progress has gotten very low, and that's just because there's been so much violence in the West. But I'm hoping to take out the East quickly, and then through doing that I can avoid having to do a long two-front war. That's my plan here. We will see if it works.
Of the paths that have been revealed, what is the worst / darkest Ukraine path?
Darkest Ukraine path? I would say probably I'd say either Ollendorf or the UPA are probably the most like horrifying in sort of a TNO-ish sense. But I think there's also something to be said for the horror of Libron as well. He's definitely less obviously and immediately terrible, but he's a pretty awful person, and it'll become obvious quite quickly. So really the answer is any path where Germany or fascists win is going to be pretty awful.
Do you think part of that Lightbrand horror thing is kind of like the the sentiment of the worst slave owners were the ones that were polite?
Yeah, I think that a big part of it is that there's an entitlement to his philosophy. I really, what I find fascinating about him as both a historical figure and as a real figure is the way that there's a clear entitlement to his thought process, the idea that he had the right to define Ukraine's future, and therefore Ukraine needed to bow to him because he was from it, but he was also a German, and he was kind of better than anyone there. And so there is this way in which he may imagine himself as saving the Ukrainian people, but it's worth noting he will only ever allow that from his own perspective. If a Ukrainian person tells him he's doing something wrong, he's not going to listen to them because in his mind their opinion is not as valuable as his own. Because fundamentally, even if he doesn't want to be, he is a racist, and that racism is just unavoidable.
All right, we have another British question here. So, let me
Ooh,
take a look.
goody.
Here we go. So, what is the state of the Royal Navy after the war, and how much has the fleet managed to exile to Canada or other dominions?
The answer is a bit grimmer than previously. Germany has distinctly not allowed for the retaining of any capital ships for the UK. Some people might counter to say that Hitler wanted to make Britain a naval power that would provide Germany with naval leverage over the US. That was more so belief system that developed, or at least a plan that was very early on in Hitler's coming to power in the 30s, and then also in the very early months of the war. So when Sea Lion happened in 1943 and it ended in 1945, these sentiments were no longer there because very much surprise, Hitler's beliefs can change. As for Royal Navy ships that flee to exile in Canada and other places, not so much Canada, because simply the fact that Canada is not really a country that can even really support lots of battleships and aircraft carriers being docked in their ports. They really do not have the port capacity that people think they might have. For the US, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but by the 1960s, they really wouldn't have much utility value, and there is not enough money going around to do stuff like refitting or anything. So any ones that do get out would most likely be sold for scrap by now.
You can see here the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic has changed color, and what do you know? That's not a Kazakh person. It's a sad Pole. There's supposed to be a bio there. But nevertheless, I'm not going to elaborate on that any further. I will leave you to speculate on what's going on there.
With Ukraine, who did the colonists that planned Verbauer people? Who do they side with?
Almost entirely they would side with Ollendorf, because Ollendorf is the one who fundamentally is most willing to, not even willing to, actively intends to protect Wehrbauer life. That is sort of his main goal, is to build a Ukraine that is more functional when it comes to living in it as a Wehrbauer. So for the average Ukrainian, that will be the answer.
How
Oh
come
no.
the Reichskommissariat still have a relevant and important partisan activity 20 years after the war's end? Wouldn't they all either be dead or the arcades be some sort of fail state? I'd imagine the situation would be similar to Caucasian. That's a very tough question because on some level you are quite right, but on another level, what would we be left with as like people trying to design content for Eastern Europe? So
Yeah.
I feel like we do have to have stretches in the imagination for like what we can essentially have happen. For example, the UPA path especially is very much like lots of people have come up with ways to try and like justify why they exist, and it's amazing. The content's stunning. But yeah, if we really wanted to like, you know, because people say that we're all about realism, we're not. If we were all about realism, the UPA's like membership list would be practically enough to fill just one single basement if we were talking about in 1962. But for the sake of like just, you know, we want to make we want you guys to have fun. So that's why partisan movements in Eastern Europe are still as active as you know, beyond what you could consider like, you know, natural.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth considering that in the real world, Civil War, that's not good. In the real world, the Warsaw Pact, which is in many ways at least similar, essentially only had two major moments in its entire history and along all of its European nations in which there was any real like large-scale rebellion. There were, of course, Forest Brothers in Ukraine, but and in other places early on. But the reality is that we want it to be a game where you can play through the various cultures and factions and not just have it be a couple Germans squabbling over what's the right way to oppress a nation. And therefore, we've, you know, needed to build the system as it is.
This is a bit of a dark question, but how many Jews in Roma are left in Europe in 1962? The answer is not a lot.
Not many. Some have at least managed to escape, like, for example, Bulgarian Jews, by and large. But even when they have escaped, that doesn't mean that they have survived. It doesn't mean they've remained in Europe. It just means they're, you know, free to be somewhere else. And within Europe... Oh, there's Civil War. Oh. You're saying...
Oh, and the death of Prime Minister Juanda.
Oh, did I miss one?
That's very sad, because the last hope of Indonesia in some regard.
Oh. Sorry, Indonesia.
You'll see a lot more of Indonesia in coming future. There's some really exciting stuff planned for that. I can't wait to show it off to you guys.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's been a couple of changes to like the pie charts, including there's no more progressivist part of the pie chart in Indonesia. That's because we moved Islamic modernism as a sub-ideology. We moved that from progressivism over to liberal conservatism, as we didn't see that was like a, you know, a credible assignment.
You didn't give it a name. And one thing I wanted to show off, because I mentioned it earlier, is the new setup for Gotland. It'll have national spirits in the final update, but here you can see its new leader, Franz Meyerhofer, a long-term Gauleiter for the region, who is now having to face the existential reality of the fact that if things go wrong, he's about to be murdered horribly, as he should be, frankly, because, you know, he's a Nazi.
Sorry, would you be able to right-click Romania real quick?
Oh, sure thing.
Alright, okay, I'm good. Pănescu's in power. So Pănescu was like, you know, he was Mihalache's deputy, and since Mihalache is an old man, he essentially what he did in 1962 was pass an incredibly liberal constitution for the time, which has vastly redefined a lot of, like, you know, jurisdictions between you know, state and individuals in Romania. It's quite egalitarian, actually, for especially for the standards of Europe. but due to his age, now he's stepped down, and his deputy is taking power. So the PNT looks to still be a dominant party, but of course, as we know, 1963 is the year everything goes to shit, and that could still be the case with Romania itself, especially now that Ukraine's about to collapse into some pretty heavy levels of violence.
Yes.
I got some like England law to share. Someone asked a question a while ago, and I've just been waiting for the perfect opportunity. So it's basically about the different factions of like the collapse and like the different figures. So as you may or may not know, Mosley, he got killed by the British government during Sea Lion. So obviously he's dead. And so the Mosleyites, they were sent into turmoil with his death, which allowed the aristocratic fascist in the BPP to assume power in 1946. The Mosleyites later reorganized within the BPP and played a key role in deposing Chesterton in 1956, under the ideologues led by Andrew Fontaine, currently led by Ham and Darrell Path. A.K. Chesterton, we kind of retconned him before we said that he drank himself to death in 1957.
Which, sorry, can I interrupt to say,
Yeah.
when I wrote that piece of law, I didn't actually know that Chesterton was an alcoholic in real life. I essentially just made that up, and I just happened to be proven right when it turns out that he was one. So
many such cases. So he did. So in our law, he doesn't drink himself to death, and instead he merges loyalists with his allies Wallop and Bedford to form the present-day Old Guard. He's politically inactive at GameStart, but will return to politics as a powerful Old Guard leader after the uprising ends. Don Vile, he's an Old Guard and the leader in 1962. He was a Chesterton loyalist who assumed power due to the Old Guards being left as kingmakers, due to the pragmatists and ideologues being deadlocked. Whilst Prime Minister, most of his policy is dictated by pragmatists and ideologues, leaving the Old Guards the least powerful faction, but they still have control of the House of Lords. And finally, we got Wallop. He leads the social credit, aristocratic hardline clique within the wider Old Guards, along with Bedford. He's a close friend of Don Vile and a powerful figure within the BBP, and you can choose whether to uphold the Old Guard's legacy or betray them and try to implement social credit. And you can try to make that choice. And in his 100-day focus tree.
It's a very fun 100 days. When we get around to allowing you guys to play it, when this releases, I hope you will have a lot of fun, as much as we did designing Wallop's stuff, because we really did build sort of something up from scratch. And it turns out that the social credit path is actually the most realistic one compared to the other one where he tries to hold up the Old Guard's legacy. So that's very interesting.
All right, we do have a more generic question here. So, in addition to Kazakhstan, is there any other tags that will be receiving new skeleton content?
Well, there's Romania. Other than them, I think those are the only two in this update. Maedhros, if you know there's any others. I don't think there are.
Sorry? Countries with updated skeleton content in this...
I think it's just
Serbia. Serbia.
Oh.
Actually, I think today added was a lot of stuff for Afghanistan. Actually, I think
cool.
I think Jane, she uploaded a lot of the stuff today for that, and it's a very comprehensive skeleton. I think that it goes all the way to the end of the game. It was initially going to be scheduled for PW, but I assume that's now been moved forward, and I'm just excited to.
And there's also some Serbia stuff I did as well.
One question we got that I thought I'd answer is, will there be any lore/content regarding Crimean Gothic peoples? Wouldn't Germans try to revive this culture? Maybe the German colonists would mix with locals of Crimea and create some mixed culture like the Zhujian and Guangdong. And the answer to that is no. not really. I mean, obviously, the name Gothenland itself suggests a connection, and that connection is felt by the creators of the Gau, so they certainly imagine it as one, but they will not be particularly interested in sort of crafting a new Crimean Gothic culture. Funnily enough, that was actually at one point a plan, and we did consider it, but ultimately we decided that it was sort of the wrong direction to go with Gothenland, and so it currently does not. No. Let's see some other just. Oh, and also, did you want to say anything about the Transnistria War before I go on? I just wanted to stop here because I saw it happen.
Nothing much really. It's just the Transnistrian War we showed you in the leak. It's just going to be how Romania is basically turned upside down by the simple fact that the world is coming crashing down around them, especially with Ukraine. And lots of Ukrainians who have suffered under a very brutal status quo within Transnistria, of where the monarchy, the parliamentarians, and the people in Romania that are upholding this so-called progressive society have essentially ignored everything that's going on in Transnistria for now, because a lot of them just don't like to think about it. It's the mistake that Antonescu made, and it's the colony that no one wants anymore. So here comes the Ukrainians from the Reichskommissariat to essentially remind them that they can't just ignore it.
Speaking of, here is the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. You can see.
I also think we got Himmler spawning in the UK as well.
Oh, there we are. Well, look at that. So you've got the original government, of course, with Ronald Kane, but you've also got here in Himmler this very cool pipe smoking portrait. If I'm not mistaken, this guy is on the starting screen. Am I correct?
Yes, he is. Also included with a pet cuckoo bird, which he was a very avid naturalist, and happened to have many exotic pets around him on all times. It's very interesting if you're reading a biography on the man, despite the fact that he was heavily involved in the far right when he was quite young. And he went from an infiltrator of a fascist movement to being sort of somewhat radicalized into that. I don't think he ever really abandoned sort of like pretty far right beliefs. But obviously when the war came, he made a decision to, instead of sympathize with them further, he decided to side with the government of the day and help imprison fascists. Obviously, there's a lot more nuance to this person than I'm putting forward right now, and I don't want to try and like spout a propaganda line, but you're going to be experiencing, when we get around to Himmler, there'll be a lot more explorations into Knight's character, and there's going to be a lot of some pretty like big questions to be asked about what legacy do we make of this person.
All right, here's another UK question. So, this person said, I noticed that there is a St. Patrick's Cross on the Himmler's flag. Does that mean that the free UK will have a claim over Northern Ireland?
Yes, they still have a claim over the Northern Ireland. The reason why the collab flag doesn't include that, for reasons other than just we want to signify like a difference between the countries a bit more like distinctly, is that Germany arbitrated within a dispute between Ireland and Britain over the subject of Northern Ireland following the end of the war, to essentially have it so that Ireland would be the custodian of Northern Ireland affairs, and it would be placed under like limited stormont authority. The UK had to formally end its at least de jure claims on the territory itself, at least for now. There's lots of bad blood going between like people in Britain and people in Ireland. It's in their governments over this decision. However, it's not something that with Germany overlooking the situation they can really do much about. That might change, but as of now, it's very much there's not much that can be done. But yes, Himmler does take a more active role because they obviously didn't have to like go into any agreements arbitrated by another power. and they are quite idealistic in the beginning. Will the new alternate ideologies and faction ideology systems be represented into Japan's diet scripted effects and the US election effects? As far as I know right now, the US team doesn't plan to include these in content, contemporary or in future. And for the Japan one, it will almost certainly be handy when it comes to when we get to the rework in TSS. But for right now, no, I don't think there's any plans to use it for the present setup of Japan. Will there still be the mini-game where Himmler and the collabs fight for control of territories before the Civil War? No, and the reason why is because when you think about it, it does feel kind of ludicrous that the collabs had the foresight to predict that such an occasion would occur, and that they would instead try to like make best preparements for like a confrontation with Himmler. And that's like the sole crux of their content, where a lot of the stuff around Old England's content just basically ignored political, economic, and like, you know, diplomatic and military affairs, and entirely focused it and tunnel visioned it on like the fight against Himmler. That obviously comes with the fact that your content was designed quite quickly, and you weren't able to like get out all the visions and the dreams you wanted to have. But that's not something that we're going to fall into the same problem of. So when the uprising comes for the collabs, it's going to be very much a surprise, because you spent the past year and a half working a lot on domestic affairs and really just like, you know, the day-to-day governings of the country, and especially the factional struggles that now divide the party so much. For Himmler, it's a bit different. You're going to be able to participate in the sort of stuff that you would see in the Old England content a bit more, but we're going to spice it up a bit more, and you'll see, because we do have plans for that right now, and we do have ideas for what we want to put in mechanics. Would you just be able to show everyone the like trees of the like Ukrainian Civil War contenders?
That's a good idea, yes. So here we have the Republic of Ukraine. They've got a unique system of essentially having to balance their various factions. Hopefully if I look at one of these, it should have this. Yes, right there where it says populist support for the revolution. I'm not certain we've leaked this, but you're balancing these three pillars of the revolution: the populists, the collaborators, and one other group, the partisans, yes. And then up here you've got the Ukrainian state. The Ukrainian state, you can see, has this just awesome focus icon for taking back Crimea, which I just want to show off. But in general, the Ukrainian state, led by Klyachkivsky, this is the OUNB, or the Banderites, and their goal is to first take out the UNRA and what's known as the Brothers' War. You can see it right here, and you can also see it right there, and move on to taking over everything else. And then on the other side, over here, you've got the UASSR, the Ukrainian Nationalist, or the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and they also have quite a nice long tree here. Yeah. And each of them can, of course, win. And in the case of, I should also mention, for the Ukrainian state, for those who are not aware, there's also several groups that are looking to take over. Let me see if this is mentioned in here. Yes, it is, right there. Shukyevich and Stetsko. I think I'll save talking deeply about what their ideologies are for another time, but
especially because a lot of them is it's quite complex.
Yes.
Compared to.
So, it is a quite complex bunch of beliefs, but the long and short of it is that each of these groups sees themselves as the head, or each of these people sees themselves as the logical successor to the ideas of Bandera, and they're all going to try to take over in order to enforce their vision. Oh no. Oh. No.
If you lose to them, that's all they'll remember the stream for.
I know.
They're not going to remember it
I'm
for what we've
aware,
said.
I'm
They're just
aware
remember
of
that you lost
this.
the
And
war.
the thing is that there's like a good chance I lose, but I mean, what else am I gonna do, right? I at least can take over the city. There we go. We're winning somewhere.
Yeah, you should just be able to snake their VP's notes.
Yeah. We just need something to go Rostov.
How is Ostland in this update compared to the current Ostland? Nothing's really much changed.
Yep.
The only thing that you might see on the thing right now is that there's like a color change with the central router stuff, and I think that's a bug.
Yeah,
We're going to be fixing that quite soon.
It's ugly, in my opinion.
Everyone's entitled to their opinion here.
Exactly.
You mentioned that Mosley was assassinated by the government. How did Fontaine manage to survive when he was allies with Mosley and campaigned with him in places like Northumbria and East Anglia before he even joined the Conservative Party? Ultimately, when it comes to these things, people eventually just have to move on from the fact that someone's dead. And there are a lot of people that were around in the 40s and 50s when the fascist movements in the UK that were a lot more. I don't even want to say that. I would actually even say more just flat out interesting than Mosley, in that they had far more out there ideas, and they had far more like I don't want to say like political skill, because obviously when it comes to like the British far right, none of them would like survive contact with an actual British politician. But I want to say just like they had more concrete ways of how they want to go about that. So people like Alexander Raven Thompson, who isn't alive in the game at start anymore. He died in the 50s, as he did in real life. But he's going to very much be a person that like extends a lot of ideological legacy within the ideologues. And the main crux of Fontaine's content isn't really much that he's like an independent person working as like, you know, a political like figure. It's very much that he's someone that is being actively controlled by two other members around him. So that's Jeffrey Ham and John Bean, which you're going to see a bit in the intro. There's not going to be an exhaustive amount, but they are very, very contrasting and very interesting people. And yeah, when we do get to full collab content, you'll see very much that like the legacies that people leave behind aren't always ones that stick forever, but you can also still see the inklings of like what they thought of, because obviously when it comes to fascist movements like these, coherence isn't obviously something that comes naturally to people that don't have the sometimes the forward thinkingness of a lot of people, like I mentioned before, like Raven Thompson and Bean. Although that's not to say that, again, they're competent, because they're not.
Ugly, you're having people demand that you take your national focuses.
Oh my god, you're right. Thank you. Thank you, people in chat, for reminding me to play the game. I'm getting distracted by the fun of Hearts of Iron.
He's turned into a micro zombie, man.
I know.
Salvage.
And also, this one's breaking off. I gotta catch them.
Why doesn't Germany reinvade a Himmler Britain like it reinvades the Arcades, especially if Britain has no navy worthy of it? If you caught up with recent leaks, it does. There's a thing that will happen called the Channel Crisis. Depending on the status of the proxy tab, which might not be complete in time for the release, we may not be able to get that happen, but it will certainly be in a hotfix later on. But you'll definitely see the fact that Germany is not going to take the second biggest economic power in Europe and their most possibly their most strategic weakness, because without Britain, they are very much threatened in the West. They're not going to take that lightly, obviously, and it can result in a sea lion, as we've leaked to you guys before.
All right.
Will Germany therefore incorporate the new ideology system? If so, how will these work? It's always bothered me that Speer's reformed National Socialism was incorporated into fascist. Yeah, Germany is definitely using this system. I think it actually might be using it right now. I'm not sure.
We can go check.
Well, I don't think we can now right now because of the Civil War, but
No, but you can see it here that it is in fact now in NatSoc.
Yeah, we got rid of Speer being under fascism, as that was incredibly silly of us. But yeah, we do use the multiple ideology system. For example, when you're going through the Speer and Bormann facelifts, you're going to be there's different types of like reformists, reactionaries, or revolutionaries, all these different clades within the German system, and they're going to be some of them are going to be represented on the ideology wheel through different colors. So definitely.
We got a question about the British lesbian storyline. That is present, but we'll rewrite it differently from how it was in the old content. So it's still like similar storyline, but in our own way. Makes sense.
And not just that, we also have people. We've incorporated a lot of the ideas for the Guangdong characters system, which a lot of actual countries that are in development now would really starting to warm up to the idea of having that be a great way to explore how in everyday people on the ground function under regimes. So yeah, you're going to see a lot more of that.
I should mention one of those is in fact Ukraine. I haven't been highlighting them, but in fact in Ukraine, the Ukrainian, there are 3 different characters which you will be able to see in this patch that each have their own different relationship with the Ukrainian state. One of them is German. Well, there are 3 sets of characters. One of those is a German family, and the other 2 are, I will, I think, leave for discovering in the game itself, because I think they're quite interesting, and they've got an interesting relationship with what's going on. So, for example, oh, and also I should point out the grain status. So you'll notice right now our grain is plentiful, but the grain is slowly depleting. And the further we play, the more it is going to deplete. Right now, currently there is actually no decay, but the decay will decrease by 5 every 30 days. So it will not only start decaying, it will decay faster and faster and faster until eventually we are out of food. So there we go. We've now defeated one of the factions, and now we can take this army and we can place them. I think we will put them down here. Oh, I can't. Why can't I draw a front line there? That's just strange.
Speaking of sea lion, will there be any time limit for Germany to capitulate the UK? No, we're not going to do the all-Goering system of determining conquest of countries. Sea lion is going to be determined by whether or not the US is like going to commit fully. If they commit fully, it's going to result in World War III. Believe it or not, we're adding back the stakes of that thing into the game.
So excited. Hype.
But if the US doesn't commit fully, there is no way as the UK you are going to win. Even if you are the most skilled and talented based micro player, there's going to be very much this is your fail state. Like, we can't obviously have Himmler be on the level of fail states of the collabs, because that's just the nature of having a more stable political system. So for Himmler, your main fail state is you fucked up. You managed to navigate your way around the Germans and fall flat on your face. And now they're coming back at you with the full force of a military superpower. The greatest land military power human history's seen at that point. Can Britain still survive the Channel Crisis and not get invaded? Yes. That's entirely based around like attempting to fast-track the process to becoming an OFN member as quickly as possible, as well as soliciting the US. A lot of the proxy you're going to be having around Sea Lion, or at least around like the Channel Crisis, is basically just around the idea of trying to get the US public to actually start caring about the country once more. Because it's 20 years after it's in Germany's backyard, a lot of US political and strategic thinkers think that Europe is very much a lost cause at this point. So trying to drum up support and mobilize it and just really bring back to life the notion that we should fight for Britain is going to be a big thing when it comes to confronting Germany. And if you're successful, you'll be rewarded in that you live. And you get to live on to see the content implemented in full.
Oh, I should also mention, by the way, shout out to Maedhros for everyone being here, because it is like 6 a.m. in their time zone.
At 7 a.m. actually,
7
yeah.
a.m. Yeah, so, you know, they really love you guys to show up past midnight. And, yeah.
So in Collab Britain, is it any way democratic? I mean, public can vote for various parties, but is the formation of parties and cliques forbidden, suppressed? Britain's a one-party state. It still has elections, and there are still people outside of the BPP that do have seats of parliament, but they are not members of any political parties. They are independent candidates. The BPP will essentially solicit lists of people to run for districts, and in some cases it is quite literally a yes or no of do you approve of this highlighted list of people for this district. In some cases that's obviously not the case, because we do have independents within the House of Commons, but any other collab parties, at least at the beginning, no. The BPP is very much a one-party state. And even with the Butler democratization things, it's going to be very much undercut by the fact that Wilson and Maudling as well both see the merits of just having a one-party system, because it's easier to get their reforms done, simply just because of the existence of it. What are the general rundowns of other RKU paths like Ohlendorf and Breltingham?
Well, Ohlendorf, I mentioned this earlier, but Ohlendorf's main thing is free market reform and essentially creating a state which in his mind is more beneficial to the Ukrainian settler and more broadly to the, not for the German settler in Ukraine, and more broadly to the long-term goal of creating a German Reich that will last 1,000 years. And Brodegom, who in the real world was a fairly liberal West German diplomat, his goal is to create he's an idealistic man who believes he can make a better system, one that is better for the Ukrainian people, and which, even while it still is within the Nazi government, can permit more, I don't want to say necessarily liberalism exactly, but definitely more freedoms. Less of a fascist grip on Ukrainian life.
Will people other than Penescu be able to lead Romania at this point, like Kaposu, for example, the private secretary of the Liman? So when Penescu ascends the presidency, Kaposu is president of the PNT, so he gets the party presidency. He'll only be able to be that he'll only be able to sort of be like a head of state, so president of the Council of Ministers or prime minister, for really only a temporary amount of time if he does come to power. Because he's more focused on coordinating the party itself, and he's not really a guy that's that interested in the top job anymore. if the US fully commits and Germany loses all ports, does that mean a peace with a no-offend Britain? No, it just means nuclear war. How do you join the OFN and not have a World War III happen? It sounds like those two conditions are based on the same thing as the US supporting you. When it comes to the US supporting you in the Channel Crisis, it's to a point that the US assembles enough industrial and military might to not just cower the Germans, but also to make them consider that it's really not something that's worth fighting for at that point. Like, believe it or not, Sea Lion is very much like sort of a reluctant move for the Germans in many ways. But it's still one that they will win nonetheless if it's just Britain.
Another Britain question. So, the British Popular Front guy, I assume you mean Jones, can lead to the communists ending, right? Yeah, that is correct. You need Jones first before you can achieve the communist or the Trotskyist path. Yeah, that's.
I don't think we've revealed the leader of the mainstream communist one. I know that
we have not yet.
No. Would you like to? Because I feel like it's not that like.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's Mick McGahey. Wait, I don't have a Twitch account, so I can't post it. But yeah, he's the Bolshevist path.
Mick McGahey. He was a Scottish CPGB activist.
Yeah,
actually, there's a pretty funny anecdote about him. Is that when he was under surveillance by MI5, they basically just gave up doing it because one, he had one of the thickest Scottish accents in like human history, and two, he was quite often drunk, and they just literally couldn't understand what he was saying, and many times when they were trying to bug him. But that shouldn't be like the main takeaway of what he is. He's a very interesting person if you bother to read up about him. Will the US place or build nuclear sites and weapons in an OFN UK, and how much does this trigger Germany? That'll be covered in the Channel Crisis, actually. A lot of extra stuff you're going to be doing is negotiating based around like stipulations in terms of like what the UK can. Obviously, because we want to keep the scope of UK content as low as possible, we don't want to like open cans of worms. We're not going to have stuff like Germany still stays like a major economic power, or like Britain's neutral or whatever, and like doesn't choose a side. It's still going to, but there's lots of leeway in terms of like military placements, nuclear placements especially. If any concessions were to be made, the first to be made would be like Britain as like non-nuclear. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to hopefully bring that to you guys when we do finish it.
Apparently the Odessa crisis popped off.
Oh yeah, the Odessa hostage crisis. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
Essentially, in Odessa itself, a bunch of people have now just been taken hostage by Ukrainian partisans. That includes Romanian officials, and that includes German officials as well. So Transnistria is like dually run by Romanians and Germans at the same time. Although Romania does take the bulk of the administrative work, Germany does very much coordinate a lot of the security policy, and they have their own Oberkommando running within that whole governorate. So
another question. Yeah. Another question is: can Commie UK survive? Will the UK support Red UK? The answer to those questions is yes. Red Britain will have full content. And will the US support Red Britain? That's also a yes, but it will be as an OFN partner. Britain won't be a full OFN like member. It's kind of like alliance due to circumstances, really. And if like Red Britain finds like a more suitable security guarantor, they'll just abandon the US. Yeah,
that's a very early West Africa war. I think that's the earliest one you can get.
It's a cool event. Also, I did it.
I'm so happy to see that the Civil War is still ongoing. There was a lot of balancing done for the UK Civil War, and I'm just glad that we're getting past it.
Yeah.
much going into April '64, and it still seems like there's a lot more fight to go.
Yeah,
I'm very happy.
Is the neo-socialist UK path a Himmler path or a collab path? The neo-socialist path has been like cut, being replaced by.
It's not been cut. It's just that the person's. There isn't really like there's not a neo-socialist faction within like British like the BPP. It was very much just like one guy's very weird beliefs because he's like an ex-Labour pacifist who also supported like collaboration with Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But we decided rather than doing that, we would just move him to straight corporatism, and you'll see him. He'll be around in collab content, but he won't be under neo-socialism. Although neo-socialism is an ideology you might see around somewhere within other places of the world, especially in places that it matters, like France.
Will Red Britain become a republic? Yes, pretty clearly. Jones establishes a republic in Britain called the Commonwealth of Britain, and and so like the communists, they also established a republic. If you want your wholesome monarchical socialism, you have Foot in the Himmler path, where he keeps the monarchy.
But it's really not a crux of his content that he keeps the monarchy. A lot of Foot's like it's basically stuff that goes on in the background. But if that makes you guys happy that you have your wholesome monarchist socialist path that a lot of you seem to like obsess over, go ahead, be my guest. What is the difference between the different flavors of British fascism? So to be completely honest, British fascism as a sub-ideology is a bit like arbitrary that we've decided to put in. The main reason why we did that, especially back on the sub-mod, is we wanted to show the differences between how the old guard, the ideologues, and especially the different people within the ideologues itself view what they want out of Britain. So obviously there's the old guard where it's just the corporate state will serve the interests of Britons, like not just the elites, but like uplift the people in sort of a paternal way. And then there's the ideologues where it's like very much you delve into some of the like pretty outlandish views for what they want of the state. So some of them are quite literally like we must organize the entire economy around syndicates, or we'll have like fascist mondragons, so like workers' cooperatives, but they're all based around like trying to build up fascism from below. It's very interesting in terms of just like trying to explore some of these completely wacky ideas in a way that's like sensible. But yes, British fascism is a bit arbitrary, and it's not really that much different from a couple of other fascist sub-ideologies. It's just there so that you can get something a bit more out of Britain content than you wouldn't otherwise have. Plus, it's also something that I can just fit John Bean into, because John Bean doesn't actually fit many of the other fascism sub-ideologies. And creating one just for him turned out to solve that by so much. No more headaches over me wanting to try and fit him into Sansepol Crismo, which was like his closest like partner.
That's
across
awesome.
other
kept him
subdivisions.
as that. That would have been really funny. If I may return to Ukraine here. So just for reading off a couple of Ukraine questions, what are your future plans for the USSR and the Ukraine state in terms of 10-year playthrough content? And the answer to that is simple. They don't have 10-year playthrough content. They have playthrough until the invasion of Germany and fighting back Germany. So you will have that gameplay, and you'll be able to see what happens afterwards, but you won't play through it, because I think it's fairly obvious. Like once you get to that point, it should all make sense, and I think will be satisfying without needing to go all the way to 1972. And also, something I will note there is that tree may have looked a little small, but that was not the end of the tree. I just happened to be a good player. So I hope when all of you play the RK, you check out what happens if you take that focus at the bottom, which I believe is called Panacea, because I will say it quite changes things. It takes things in a very dark direction. if you survive too long and don't manage to take things over. But luckily, I have managed to avoid that, so we will not be seeing what happens if you reach the end of that tree in this playthrough. And instead, we will simply go through these events. Or focuses. So, you can see we have this news event. And right now, looking at where our empty throne is, you can see we are in a nice lead. We have a really strong control of the bureaucracy and the collaborators and the industrialists. Actually, we don't have the collaborators. We just have the industrialists and the bureaucracy, but that's fine. That should be good enough. We'll try to take over whatever else we can, but I believe we will be able to take over pretty easily here. But we will go all the way to the end, or just about the end, and I'll try to show off what I can here.
If the US can intervene in the French Civil War, why can't they intervene during the English Civil War? Loaded question, but the US won't be taking as much of an active role in the future in Europe, especially when it comes to aspects like the French Civil War. We won't be having like full committed OFN responses, with the exception being like Free France currently. But yeah, the reason why they don't intervene in Britain is because this is like the first thing that they do in Europe. This is like 20 years of like basically non-committal towards Europe. They still don't know like what's like acceptable and what's not when it comes to like angering Germany, and deploying troops in Britain to try and like beat the collab government would very much violate Germany's prerogatives on lots of different ways, and that's essentially why. So yeah, the US is very fresh in the game, and they really don't know the limits of what they can do.
I got 3 Britain questions to answer. First one is the Rev Front Britain path mentioned an actual path or like a stepping stone to the other leftist paths? Jones's path is a full path. It's a revolutionary front, whilst he determined the nature of this front. Next question is, what's the main difference between the Trots and the mainstream communist? Do they like to cooperate with Himmler? They both kind of break with Himmler, the left resistance. I'll go into detail another time about that. The main difference is just how do they like want to rebuild Britain, like the best way to reconstruct the nation
Perron.
in a leftist image.
Yeah. Perron takeover?
Yeah, Perron is. I think he's about
the
to
last
come.
question. Yeah. And one last question is, someone asked if Chesterton can become the UK leader. He can't, but he can return to wield great power in the old guard path and get a lot of his policies and ideas implemented. But he has to compromise with Wallop and the aristocrats.
Very much his time as prime minister has come and gone, and it did come and go in the law, especially with the with the West Russian War and the uprising within Britain, which ended his premiership. He, in some cases, doesn't really want the top job. It's very much another thing that we're going for a lot more in TNO now is that you can portray political figures a lot better sometimes if they're just people acting within the shadows.
Yeah.
Rather than just like having everyone and their mother be a path, you can have like important figures play a role outside of just purely essentially just you know being a head of state and having a path. Even though the US can't send volunteers, will they get decisions to covertly tip the scales in favor of him? Yes, especially with like CIA interactions. They can. I know they can also, with the help of the Canadians, I think they can intervene to help in some of the, especially the Isle of Man conflict. If any of you remember that leak back when we were a submod, that's a very interesting point about the Civil War, is that all these supplies going to Britain pass through the choke point in the Irish Sea around the Isle of Man, where the Kriegsmarine does have several, not sort of ad hoc stations but still definitely light ships able to very much enforce like a blockade of the country from enemy shipments. So the whole taking of the Isle of Man or defending of it is going to be an important part of the Civil War. And especially taking it as Himmler is going to open up a lot more options for you in the Civil War. It very much is like a second wind for Himmler.
One Red Britain question is, are they able to fully join or establish the Comic-Con? As you may or may not have seen, the Comintern is getting a drastic facelift, or a complete overhaul actually, where it's going to be established by Red Italy, but it's also going to be potentially established by Red Britain as well. But that's a long while away until the Comic-Con update has come.
Someone asked what happens to the TFL Discord server after the integration. Well, integration's happened and the server's not been deleted. It's important that it's important for me to access some of the dev channels to find stuff that I had written down before and not put onto the main server. And also, I mean, why would we deny you guys a way to better talk to us and hang out and chill? Which people that are on the TFL Discord and are regulars there, you'll know it's quite fun. Who'll be more committed to aiding Britain, US, or Canada? I mean, I guess in terms of just raw numbers, in terms of just total amount, that would be the US, obviously. When it comes to Canada, they could have a higher relative amount in terms of enthusiasm to support. But that's really dependent on the fact of whether or not you have Diefenbaker in power. So if you have the Liberals, so if you have Pearson in power, he's not really that much interested in trying to intervene in the UK. He's very much hands off. We're going to just send the bare minimum to make it publicly necessary. But to be completely honest, he doesn't really that much care about Britain in its civil war. Diefenbaker is the absolute opposite. He is very much committed to the idea of empire, and seeing this as his opportunity, he will pull no punches when figuratively speaking.
So coming up here, we're about to hit the power struggle's conclusion, which is a nice long focus tree. Hopefully, it all works as intended. I've run several tests on it, but I have to admit, I made a dumb error and picked the wrong choice, and now we can see it's 2 versus 2, but that should hopefully lead to a more interesting storyline. I won't be reading over every event, but essentially the way that it works is that at various points the events change depending on which group is in power, and therefore not just who is currently in control, but also which specific group is in control. Changes how this storyline goes. So it's sort of a little choose-your-own-adventure that you get to play after having gone through all of this. So if everything goes right, we are still winning here, and we should be...
Oh, I think you just missed something very quickly there.
What?
Right-click on Romania, because I think you skipped the news thing. This is what I was mentioning earlier, I'm pretty sure.
There he is.
So there's Kaposu. So what happened just then was the Odessa hostage crisis ended in a success. The Romanian authorities managed to free the hostages, bring about a peaceful-ish resolution to the crisis itself. They avoided a bloodbath, and Penescu scored a political victory back at home. However, the UPA Pridnestrovye, which is the section active in Transnistria, mailed him a package bomb. And he opened it. So now he's dead, and Kaposu, who was the president of the party, has now assumed power. And he's acting essentially as an interim PM on behalf of Michael until the next elections, which are in November. And hopefully we'll get around to seeing that soon. This obviously isn't the always ending for Penescu. I will admit I did actually script what was going to happen for Romania, because this was probably the funnier outcome. But there are 3 distinct ones in which the hostage crisis ends up in a bloodbath and he can resign of a political scandal because of it. or he doesn't get bombed and the crisis is a success, and he goes on to lead a very successful government into the next elections. So yeah, there's a lot of dynamic play that you can find in Romania's skeleton, and hopefully one day Romania's content. So yeah.
One thing I just will point out again is that there's a new econ min, so if you want to hear about this guy, he is not particularly political. He's not especially important compared to the others, but he does show up here and in some other places. And in fact, if you read closely through a lot of the events in this post-war tree, we've made sure that a lot of minor characters from our plans for Ollendorf, Brodagam, and Libron all show up and get to interact with each other, which hopefully will be especially enjoyable once you've actually gotten a chance to meet them a little more in their final forms in the completed content. And sorry for not caring about any of this. I'm just going to try to focus on getting everything working here. And here we go. And with that, we've got a new head of government and a new group of people, and we're going to have one more event here. And I believe that will finish us off. Oh, and perfect timing. Right as that happens, Himmler is defeated. So.
Oh yeah, the rightful owners of Britain come back to power.
Yeah. Should I show off their post-war tree, or should I leave that for the future?
Leave that for future, because, I mean, there's not really much point to leak it. Plus, I'm pretty sure the, successes and stuff like that will be around, but I'm not 100%. I know Frost coded it very recently.
It should work in theory, but you're gonna have to wait a bit to see the successes, because there's one other tree.
Alright, well this is the last thing that we're going to show here. This final event. In the full release, there's going to be a few little epilogue events that will tie everything together and show off a little bit more, but since we're not going through the events much anyway, I might just post those as a little leak for all of you who voted Libron and want to see a little bit more of him. So, thank you all so much for being here. If there's anything else either of you want to say, Frost or Maedhros, feel free.
Do we want to just stay a bit more for questions, or do you just want to end here?
Oh, I could stay a little longer.
I'm fine with either.
I can stay a little longer. I know that.
What does the chat want? Do you want
right.
just a bit longer Q&A, or do you guys just want to wrap it up here?
I can't read chat. Tell me what they're saying. And
I'll just wait.
You're asking when release.
Oh, when release?
Of course.
I mean, we on the Ukraine side have largely set a time when we expect to have everything complete, but I don't know if either of you want to reveal anything at the moment.
When it comes to Britain, we're a little bit behind Ukraine when it comes to things, just simply because we have a lot more mechanics and GUIs planned, and a lot of it was back heavy, because when we were a submod, we didn't have the manpower and skill to really do a lot of these things. And when we got onto the team, we were able to implement a lot of what we wanted to see. So when you play Britain, there's going to be 2 big GUIs on top of decisions and stuff like that.
We kind of had a road bump with one of our artists having his laptop break, so we kind of relied on him. So that kind of put a spanner in the works. But hopefully soon.
Not for long.
Yeah.
Lots of the back-end work for the code is more or less done, and all the things are implemented. We just need to hook that up to a lot of stuff, and then make sure all the events and stuff are in, because there's a lot of events for Britain. You're going to be reading a lot. Sorry. And there'll be event picks to come along with that. So that's basically where we're at. If we just wanted to be a bit more open with you guys, but with all things considered, I think we could be on track for this month if nothing serious comes up.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
Yeah, I can say confidently, I believe the same is true for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Now, don't take it as gospel. Complications can still always happen, and we're very sorry when it does, because we are, at the end of the day, human beings. But yeah, I do think that there's a high probability that we do have something out for this month.
Iron has fallen.
Yes. So I think with that, I can say thank you all for coming. We're going to wrap up the stream now, but I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you're all excited for the ruin. I know I am, and I'm really glad I was able to show all of this to you. And thank you all for coming. All right. With that, I suppose I'm going to say goodbye. Bye,
I'll
everyone.
see you all later. It was
See you all
great
later.
talking to you all again.
No.